Welcome to the DevLaunch podcast, where we bring you inspiring stories of the tech industry's rising stars. Many dev agencies are reluctant to hire junior developers. They require a lot of training and precious time. Our guest today, Caleb Woods, has found a way to mobilize these inexperienced workers through his Craftsmanship Academy. Hear how his dev agency is turning the staffing conundrum into a strategic advantage. Caleb, I really appreciate you hopping on the show today. I know you're the CEO today and you're the owner for Role Model Software, which is a rapidly growing software development agency. But that wasn't always a business. It wasn't a business necessarily that you yourself launched. So would you mind sharing a little bit about the story and your career journey that ultimately landed you in the seat you're in today?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, it's always fun to kind of talk about the origin story. Where did somebody come from and how did they get to there? Some software was even not necessarily a discipline that I thought I had aptitude for, coming out of high school and starting to kind of go through my college journey. But I had an internship where I was working with an education coaching company where they were doing an outsourced project, and I had a background in IT and more capacity than they had kind of time for me to fill. And so I started doing some of the quality assurance QA within that project. And as I was doing that, I learned a lot about communication, communicating with an offshore team of how do you reduce that feedback loop of getting features and ensuring you get the right result of what you're looking for. But with that long cycle time, I started seeing there was opportunities for me to jump in and program. Like this was PHP at the time. And okay, there's just some of these things that I can solve and simplify. And we had kind of more evolutions of that, eventually brought that project in-house, and I led a team and hired a mentor of mine that helped to build an apprenticeship program. So we went from a team of 2 internally to 13 in about 18 months, and kind of re-platformed everything over to Ruby on Rails, which was a kind of a vision that I wanted to spearhead. But then at the end of that year and a half, we were just coming to a point where the company didn't have a super long runway for us to be able to retain this entire team. So it was a question of, all right, where do some of these individuals go next? And so Ken Auer, the founder of Role Model Software, was an advisor that had been involved with us, helping to guide some of the technology decisions that we were thinking through. So test-driven development and Ruby on Rails as a platform. And so I reached out to him and made the connection of, hey, I'm looking to figure out kind of what my next opportunity would be, looking for something where I can be challenged, not the most senior person, but learning from others. And it was really, looking for something where community and craftsmanship was going to be a big part of that.
That's super awesome. So you had a connection with him, not necessarily that you like applied for a job per se, but like he was connected with this other business you were already working in.
Right.
And so you guys kind of connected through there. And it's interesting because I know we're going to get into this in a little bit, but at Role Model Software, you also have that kind of academy, that kind of training element to the business. Was that sparked by, or was that like prompted by your experience in that other company you started off at?
It was something that I saw, wow, what happens with, here, this is me fairly early on in my career, definitely not what I would consider myself now, a software craftsman and a lot of the things that I've learned, but to see how quickly can grow up a team when focused on the right foundational elements and the right practices, really changed in what I was looking for in a company that I wanted to join. So it was, I've always said I wanted to work in a way that I'm solving business problems. Technology is interesting to me and I've got some aptitude there, but it's really jumping in and solving the business problems that's the most interesting. And so consulting was kind of interesting as an avenue for that, because you've got things that are changing on a regular basis versus, a product company around that. And the mentorship model of Role Model is something that had been part of the business from the beginning. That's really what Ken had inspired to do by creating a studio environment kind of a collaborative workspace where you can have, apprentices working alongside craftsmen and learn the trade in that same way.
Well, you guys are doing the stuff that I am super passionate about. I mean, that's the thing I talk about with Equip is my goal in growing is it really comes down to I want to create more opportunities for apprenticeship, because I think the apprenticeship model is super powerful in a day and age where a lot of people are starting to become disillusioned with higher level education.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of ways, the skills and abilities that we need in the marketplace are just not being met by higher level education. So I love that. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but would you mind sharing about what that transition looked like? I know you were with Role Model Software for what was it, about a decade before ultimately you were groomed to take over Ken's position. Could you share a little bit about what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect back on it, because 10 years feels like such a long period of time, and also it's such a short period of time in some cases too. But we reflected kind of as we did the transition of I bought Ken out of the business here at the end of 2022, so just over a year ago. And he remembers that when I joined the company, I told him, one day I want to run a consultancy. And he kind of filed that back in the back of his brain of, okay, maybe that's this business. He was into his early 50s and trying to figure out, what does succession really look like for him. And so we really had a habit of one-on-one mentoring. We interacted usually over lunch once a week. And I came onto the team as a developer. So I was working in the midst of projects. I started leading teams as a software craftsman. That happened a couple of years after I had been a part of Role Model. And Ken had kind of always pulled me into some leadership team kind of foundation. So as figuring out how do we run the business, what does that look like? We used EOS, or Entrepreneurial Operating System, as a business system for trying to organize the leadership team and our mission, vision, values, pulling those things together. So even though I wasn't in a managerial role, I was involved in helping to shape some of that vision. And so that made it easier. So about 5 years ago, Ken promoted me to the CTO role, and I stepped out of directly leading projects and kind of consulting between teams and helping to drive kind of the bigger vision. And in EOS terms, I really became the integrator. So connecting the dots of what is the vision that we want to play out. And then, we continue to have, a lot of those discussions, and also building up some of my business acumen. So was part of and still am part of a C12 peer advisory group. So there's a program for business owners, but also for key players within businesses, going through some of that same content and kind of giving those outside perspectives. So that was a real helpful thing to me of just maturing my exposure as a leader, ideas and books to read, feedback from peers that could incorporate into that. And as we were kind of seeing the shift start with Ken of having other focuses and interests that he wanted to dive into more deeply. His boys are big into the American Ninja Warrior sport, and he's opened a couple of gyms there. And so wanting to start to shift his focus there, we realized, all right, maybe Caleb is really running the place, so let's call him CEO. So that happened in 2021, which was nice that happened before we actually figured out the ownership transition. And I can see that now that's a tough thing to have gotten to a point with starting a business, helping to mature it, and now trying to say I'm not the chief person involved leading it. But we've had a really great relationship over the years to be able to do that. And then from there, it was kind of figuring out, what's the right way for this succession to happen. Part of Ken's vision was perpetuating the mission, vision, and values of who we are as a company, and seeing that really has to have like-minded leadership. So while could have looked at what's the easiest way to cash in a software company and sell out to a PE firm, it was what's a way to structure this? And we went through a lot of different iterations of how to structure that deal to get to something that was, a win for both of us, and the timing worked and all of those kind of things. But, a lot of constant communication for sure.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful to hear your guys' story because, like you said, it was 5 years ago, right, that you really got a chance to start sitting in the leadership team, playing the CTO role, but really playing the integrator role. And I mean, man, a great stepping stone into that succession or that leadership position, ultimately the CEO role, is to be the integrator. Because like you see all the ins and outs. And in some ways, you keep the visionary accountable to moving the ship forward. So that's really cool to hear that, and that it took over 5 years to kind of ultimately get to the point where you guys were able to hand over the baton. It didn't happen overnight. You weren't just like found 1 year and then the next he sold out. So that's really interesting. When I think about succession planning, oftentimes we hear about it as somebody who's approaching retirement and they need to start thinking about what are they going to do with this business. Now, would you mind sharing from your experience? You already shared a little bit, but would you share a little bit more about succession planning and what it looked like for you as the successor, right? The person who's receiving the succession planning. How were you identified as the right person to take over? Because I imagine there's probably lots of people in orbit that probably could have taken over. So how are you identified as the right person for the role?
Yeah, I think that part of that comes down to, a software company where almost every role, whether it's a more operational role or something that's directly on projects, is somebody that has some of the same foundational training as software developers. Maybe some people have moved out that a better fit on more of a business managerial front than directly applying that to software, but that kind of permeates what we do. I think a lot of it came down to interest. There's a lot of folks, because we are focused on software craftsmanship as a company. There's a lot of leaders that want to continue to stay technical, and that was actually a challenge for me. Ken originally brought this to me of, I want you to step into this director role that was kind of the precursor to becoming CTO. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to do that, because I'm early enough in my career. Am I going down the management path too soon and shutting off from what things could look like as a technical contributor in leading projects, which I love to do. And so I think for me, the thing was recognizing, what do I want to do and what does applying that at role model look like? And that's kind of, I said earlier, solving business problems has always been kind of the thing that has interested me and the consulting side of that. And so now it's actually, I get to do some of the things that I enjoy the most. I get to be in those early stage conversations, vision casting with clients. I get to jump in with craftsmen and pair on stuff that is hard challenges. I probably should be out of those details more often than not. And, that's part of the journey of going from CTO to CEO. But I'm doing that while also looking at how to build an organization that can flourish. And so getting to apply that internally versus just always being, how do we solve this challenge as an external business?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point to make is the path that we walk in moving through towards entrepreneurship and ultimately leadership, which is at some point you're faced with the hard reality that what once was a measure of success, namely your ability to code, your ability to do the thing, is now being transitioned out to you empowering others to do the thing and creating an environment where they can succeed and where they can thrive. Did it take a while for you, I guess, to finally say, okay, I think I'm ready to go down this path? Or was it a relatively quick thing, like over the period of a couple months, you're like, okay, I think I'm ready to move out of doing the software development and moving into more of the leadership stuff?
I think it took a while. It's been, a hard, I don't know, hard is maybe not the right word, but it's an interesting transition, right? Because there's a level that still being technical is fun and interesting. And so getting opportunities to program for a few hour chunk of time or work on some internal experiments is still something that is interesting to me. And, if you ask me hobbies that I would like to have more time to work on, that is kind of almost one of those that would exist. But I think changing the focus of what's the goal here, and recognizing that the impact can be much broader. Like, somebody said to me along the way as a peer, I'm always asking the question, what's the highest and best use that I can have in the organization? And when I start to ask that question, it shifts the focus from, solving this individual thing might be a use that I can and value that I can provide, but is it my highest and best use overall to hit the company goals and the organization goals of where we're trying to go?
I loved what you said, though, Caleb. It's a matter of asking the question, what is my highest and best use of my talents? And, it does take I think probably a certain degree of humility to come to that realization that, like, even though, again, I got to this place of software craftsmanship and it took a lot of hard work, fact of the matter is, like, there's even bigger and better things for me. Like, I'm great at software, and I'm sure you are phenomenal at software, but there's even more that you have to offer from a value perspective. So that's a great place to go down. And I know plenty of people who they don't cross that threshold. They don't make that leap, but good on you for doing it. That's why you're in the seat you are in today. And so I think another thing that comes to my mind as I think about the journey in leadership and ultimately succeeding and taking over as CEO and owner is, for over a decade, you've had this experience of helping with the growing of role model software. At first it was growing because you were helping to accomplish the software projects you were working on for your clients. Then it was helping grow because you're helping other people do that work. And then in CTO and then CEO role, growth is a lot of, like you're talking about, like visioning with clients and having some of those more sales and marketing type of hats that you're wearing. So what can you tell us about discovering your niche? And, like, what have you learned about making your dev agency recession proof?
Yeah. So I think this is the critical thing for role models. So being a business that's been around since 1997, there's a couple of major recessions that existed in that time, 2001 and 2008, in which, role model continued through those, but also went down to, basically an employee one kind of in those seasons.
Wow.
And there's some different blends of how the company was structured during those periods too. But the focus has always been on expertise amplification. How can we come into a business and deliver custom software that's tailored to that business that allows them to do what they're doing at a higher level, more efficiency, do something specific around that. And, we've approached that as small, high-performance teams that are working with business innovators. This typically means that, they're in a stage where they're not just looking to grow, do more what they have been doing, add numbers. They're really looking to scale. How can they do some of what they're doing with less effort or without adding, how can you do twice the amount of revenue without adding twice the amount of people and overhead and some of those kind of things. And really over the years, we're in the Triangle area of North Carolina, there's a lot of big enterprises here. There's a lot of pharma tech, and we've worked with a number of those organizations over the years. And those are great projects. They're big. They scale up. They're sustainable. They're generally fairly profitable. But they also have some downsides that they can end quite rapidly. And so that's always been one of those metrics that we looked at is, what's our mix of revenue from any one client? What's our distribution of employees across those? And while we love the idea of startups, somebody that is just passionate and has an idea and here's what they want to go after, and you're often working with the person that is right there, they often don't have a whole lot of traction in revenue to pay for software. So they're looking for technical co-founders rather than they're looking for a consulting agency. So kind of the shift and the change in focus for us happened about the time that I took over the CTO role. Was we recognized where we've had a lot of success is working with small to medium businesses, what we would kind of describe as mid-market, $10 to $200 million of revenue, that are mid-America. These are not companies that are in the tech centers of New York City or Silicon Valley. If you're there and you want to serve customers there, you have to be there as a consulting organization. But there's a lot of manufacturing, education, finance that exists in all these other areas of the country. And they know they need software, but they don't have the expertise or desire to stand up an entire software team in order to accomplish what they're looking to do. And so that's really where clarifying that has been helpful for us. Now have a much clearer idea of who we are and who we're going after. But then it also comes down to, all right, if that's who we're going after, what are we selling them? And I feel like this is always the tricky question when you're talking about custom software. People ask you, so you work for a software company, what's your product, or what kind of software? So you can say, the technology stack, or maybe for us, it's a little bit of the focus of how do we go after, expertise amplification. But it's you're selling the invisible. So how can we make it more concrete? And so that even some tools like EOS, which I mentioned earlier, of helping us define what is our unique attributes. Small, high performance craftsman led teams, is one of those areas of uniqueness. Or even just going through some training a few years ago from a company, Aradium, talking about this idea of retellability. Often conversations that you're in, there's key insights that you want to be selling to that person for them to go re-tell to their next management level. The decision happens about whether to choose you as a software company in a meeting that you're not invited to. So how do you set those things up? And so that's really been for us, what are the things that are most important for us? And that's where we landed on expertise amplification, iterative value, and process scaling as our three focuses, and defining that into a proven approach that we've developed and tested over the years. So there's these kind of principles and insights that we can think about within that.
Yeah. I mean, that retellability piece, I'm going to double click on that. It's interesting because I know one of the things you talked about was, when you think about your ideal client, they usually are, they're probably not that startup, right? Because quite frankly, they don't have product market fit. They don't really have revenue. So they can't afford what you guys need. They need a technical co-founder. You're probably also not talking about the massive, massive corporations. There's something somewhere in between, which probably also involves a couple layers of management. And so I think just to emphasize what you just said about the retellability, when you're working with that as an ideal client, where you're not necessarily working with the one and only decision maker, you're working with multiple decision makers, having something that's easy to then hand off to the next person so that they can talk you up or they can advocate for why we should be spending money with role model software. I think that's really critical. Do you feel like that was something that you guys had always had, or is that something you have recently discovered as you've gone through and really kind of tightened up your value proposition, your positioning?
I think we've had some of it from the beginning. The Ken's original tagline was turning innovative concepts into reality, which it's a fun tagline, and I get the idea. But even as we've talked about, building sustainable software and working with business innovators, these are good terms, but it's all, how do people find you and how do people understand what this looks like? Because the challenge, I feel like, with custom software and in more of the agency model is our process is so much of we're going to build the path to get to the right solution as much as we are building the solution. So I can't tell you what the right solution is today. You might have a spec sheet of some things that you want to look at, but we can both tell you that that's going to be wrong. That's not what you actually want. I just don't know what it is yet. We're going to figure that out together as we go through this journey. And so some of these tools have really helped us along the way just to think about what those concepts are, and to try to distill them. And that's kind of been my thing over the last year or two, thinking about our marketing is how can I distill those down to the small enough number of ideas that we're sharing so that it's not I'm explaining this same concept 4 different ways in 4 different conversations. I want to be coming back to the same terms over and over again, that I understand what they mean and why we're using them. And even if they aren't super common within the marketplace, nobody is Google searching for expertise amplification.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine.
Right.
We're not gonna gather that. But how does it remain sticky as we've had a conversation such that it's much easier to do that? And then putting supporting material in front of those people. So our proposals or things like that of explaining more of the why behind that, anchored within those core concepts.
That's so great. You said something else when we were talking on the topic of recession proofing your software dev agency. You touched on a very key topic that I've actually brought up a couple times in my LinkedIn posts, but it's customer concentration risk. You had said something to the effect of basically like there's some of these like very lucrative clients, these larger enterprises that have maybe a very rich project, but it might only be a one-time thing, or it might be a flash in the pan. Would you mind maybe going a little further for us, if you will, about how you guys, when you think about recession proofing, how have you navigated deciding on whether or not this is going to be the right client for you? Like, does that come into the qualification process to be like, oh, this might be too big of a company? It might actually cause some issues because we have too much customer concentration risk? Or how do you think about that customer concentration risk?
Yeah, and definitely I think the way it starts for us is thinking about it from who do we go after and what's the strategy of how we're going to go after customers. So if it is, a specific Fortune 500 company, all right, well, what's the relationships we have? I mean, basically that's the shift that we've made over time is we want to have no more than 35% and really ideally no more than 25% from any one client. And, we had that in 2020. 2020 was a kind of a rebound year for us, actually, partially because we were working with a large client that was a kind of former relationship that we had. We didn't go out and seek it, but the opportunity came to us and we maximized that. But when we had that come in, we were conscious about how we were going to approach it. And we said, we're going to still hold to our internal rule of no more than 25% of our employee capacity going into that project. And so we worked with other partner organizations to help fill out that project. And so it ended up being kind of a multi-year project that ran, but as things scaled down, we were able to scale down and spread that risk over the couple of different partners that had been involved with that. And so that made it much more attainable to think about that project and the risks that were associated with it. Because when it did finally go away, it was as if we were into a normal project cadence of, yep, we've wrapped up this project on Friday. Now we're looking for the next thing to start on Monday, which is the normal cadence that we're always looking for.
That's so good. That's so good. One of my clients, the growth director, the person in charge of growth, he said it perfectly. He said, small businesses die not from starvation, but from indigestion. And so it's this idea that, like, especially in the agency world where you have these feast and famine cycles, the more that you can be conscious about making sure that you don't have these, sugar rush spikes in your revenue only to have it, fall and crash back down, the more sustainable long-term your agency is going to be. So I love that. I love that you guys are thinking about that. 25%, I think, is a great place to start.
Well, and it's also the other piece that tied into why this mid-market, organizations that need software but don't want to hire a full-time software team is what we also saw as we made it was a slow transition to make to that over time. But it also means the opportunity to come back for follow-on work and to support them over a long period of time increases. And so it is a lot less of what is the new work we're having to win this month in order to make sure that we can meet payroll versus what's the capacity of other clients that we need to go back to of, hey, we now have some capacity from the team that is familiar with your stuff. Are you ready to, do that next feature that we talked about that you weren't quite ready to do a few months ago, or some of those pushes? So it's added a lot more predictability that, now I can look at, forecasts because we do pretty small, high performance team kind of focused projects. And so, when a cycle time on an average project is 3 to 4 months, if that's always replacing that with new work every time, you'd go nuts. But some of that, it can be filled in with, all right, 3 to 4 months, and then maybe a gap of a month or something. And then the next thing that's picking up allows a lot more flexibility. And that's kind of even the growing pain is as some of our customers have grown, out of those cycles and relying on us more. That's a new set of things for us to figure out, but we're figuring out the problem of how do we do all the work that we've got coming to us versus do we have anything coming to us, which is definitely the challenge over the time.
But arguably probably a better problem to have when
Yes.
it's that versus it's it's the first stage is make sure that you have sufficient revenue coming in and your pipeline's filled up enough. And then the second piece is, all right, can we actually execute on that and actually produce the revenue based on the work that we're doing? So I love that. We talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper, which is, how do you, at Role Model Software, how do you choose the tech stack and the software that your agency ends up running on? I know you guys have talked about Ruby on Rails is a big tech, or the tech that you guys have chosen to go with. So maybe even just share a little bit more about like why was Ruby on Rails? How has that served you, and why did you guys end up choosing that?
Yeah, and we've been on Ruby on Rails as one of our core stacks for a long time. And, often anytime I get into talking about technology stacks, one of the things that I always want to come back to is that we're focused on being a software craftsmanship shop and choosing the right technology at the right time. And, Ruby and Rails has been a key one of those for us over the last maybe almost 15 years now, but, also looking for what are those new technologies that we can be experimenting with. And so really there's a few guiding principles that we look at. One of them is, are we doing stuff that is leading edge, not bleeding edge? There's a book several years ago, this idea of crossing the chasm, so you have tinkerers and innovators that are working on stuff going up this bell curve. And there's this chasm that exists before something makes it across, becomes leading edge, and kind of makes it to the early adopter stage. And we want to sit kind of right there. Ideally, we don't want to get into the laggard late adoption kind of side of that, but every technology kind of goes through that cycle. And sometimes it gets reinvented even within the same technology. We've seen that happen in Ruby on Rails over the years of, what it was in 2005 is different than what it was in 2015, which is different than what it is today. The measure that's also important to us as a consultancy focused on custom applications for our business partners is, what's the value to our market? Specifically, what's the value to business applications? Does this help us, build systems more sustainably? Is it allow us to build the kind of applications we need? A lot of create, read, update, CRUD apps, a lot of forms, a lot of things that you're connecting to databases. Is it a good tool chain for the kind of things that we're building? And then does it improve the development experience, the feedback loops in the process? We just really feel strongly that a big part of working software is that feedback loop, and you understand the direction of where you're going by seeing that working software quickly. And so for us, that's our team's able to collaborate, will push a lot of functionality out. And then even things like testing and test-driven development, having a good assurance that we are pushing out a product that we can support long-term without having an army of QA engineers to support that.
That is really, really helpful. And I just love how you continue to use the term, not software developer, but software craftsman. And I guess the image that's coming to my mind is like, I look at something like Ruby on Rails and it's like, this is just another tool. And it gets to your point of evaluating the tool set, not based on, well, what is everybody else doing? Or, how can we be, the special unicorn, but rather like objectively, is this tool set really going to be the thing that drives value for the clients that we're working with. And I think that's super helpful. And one of the things you had talked with me about as well is you talked about some of the trends that are happening in the industry as a whole. You talked a little bit about the swing back to server-side rendering. Would you mind maybe expand a little bit more on that thought? And as you talk about that, maybe even share some more of the trends that you're seeing in the software development world?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting as you look at technology over, going back to the 60s and 70s, and then you kind of see each revolution that happens. There's some of the things that in computer science that we just relearn over and over again, and we reapply them to a new set of technologies. But you also seem to see these swings where, things go from mainframes and computing that's happening right at the source, and then thin clients that are connected to that, basically dumb terminals. And then a swing, goes from that computing power being, in a server closet to on your desk with desktop computers and microcomputers of the time. And that you can kind of see that trend swing over time, back to the internet. Even look at the first smartphones. With the iPhone was all web apps before things were installed as apps, and then you've got things moving more back towards web apps and PWAs. I think one of those trends that we've seen in the web development space over the last, I guess, really 10 years now at this point, with React and these single page front end applications, is there's a swing towards, if you want to do a really rich immersive experience within a web application, it's got to be this way, and this is the tool that you've got to use for that. And then as we built applications in that way, we started to see there's a lot of things that are really painful here. We're shipping a lot of things over the network, which we know is really expensive. We're spending a lot. We're moving the compute to these clients, which is great if you've got developers running high-end development machines for their testing, but is not great for the simple budget Chromebook that is apparently running your web application most of the time. So in those cases, we're starting to see this trend back to how do we simplify the code and the architecture? We know the experience that we want to have, the aspect of delight and not full page refreshes, but how do we think about that in a more simple way so that I'm not separating even the teams? Because you start to see, well, there's a back-end API team and I only do front-end development. So for us, full stack development and small high performance teams has been something that's been a focus for us kind of from the beginning. And so as we look at that, we're also seeing, technologies of how can you ship HTML over the wire and have that be, rendered on the server rather than having that be something that has to be computed within the browser. And so I think some of this started actually within the Elixir community with Phoenix and some of their live view kind of features around that, and then have seen some of that evolve into React server-side rendering, and Rails has Hotwire in their Turbo kind of approaches around that. So I just see more and more things moving to how do we simplify aspects of this stack rather than make it two separate worlds. And really that's the thing that often looking at is how can we make something simpler to implement. And for us, it's also recognizing of what our market and what our team composition is. We are building applications with teams of 3 to 5 people, which is very different than trying to solve engineering problems of teams of hundreds. There's different constraints, different things that are going to be of value within those.
Mm-hmm. I mean, just this example right here is yet another reason why I'm like, people talking about like, oh, AI is going to take our software developers' jobs. And I'm like, no. If anything, what it's going to do is it's going to highlight why having somebody like Caleb, like Role Model Software, as a trusted advisor next to you, as you think about your digital transformation strategy, as you think about how to incorporate AI into your workplace, having somebody who has an extensive knowledge and an understanding about, like, not only are we seeing a swing back to server-side rendering, but we're also seeing the why behind that trend. Is it has stuff to do with, well, what's the hardware that the people who are going to be consuming the application are going to be on? Like, those are things that you're not going to just get just because you type into ChatGPT, write me a line of code for blah, 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 blah. Like, you're going to get that because you have people who have a decade of or more of experience navigating challenges and problems and who've seen the trends in the marketplace. So I love that example. This is a really, really, really great one. So I know role model software over the years has been growing steadily. And in particular, even though 2023, from everything I've heard from the people I've talked with, was a relatively rough year for a lot of people, a lot of dev agencies, you're continuing to grow. You've expanded. You're moving into a new space to house some of the new hires that you guys are bringing on. What can you tell us about being able to grow a dev agency, adding employees without diluting your culture?
Yeah, that's definitely been a focus, along the way. I think I heard the metric, your culture is most at risk when you go through multiples of 10 and 3. So like going from 3 people to 10, or 10 to 30, or 30 to 100. Your structure has to change because you can't operate the same way that you were at one of those previous numbers when you get to that next level of scale. And so that's always been kind of one of my focuses in thinking about that. We were at 20 people at the beginning of 2020. And so we're now at 40. And we've kind of crossed that 30 threshold. At 20, we behaved more like a team of 10, and now at 40 we're much at a different spot. And so for me, it's been having clarity that it's something we've got to focus on. And I've always been a believer in having a rallying cry, something that we know we're looking at so we can measure as a team. So for me, in my time as CEO, that's been having a theme for the year. So 2022, as a great example, we look at the distribution of our team of skill levels. It was growing the middle. That was where we needed to recruit for the right people. We needed to help train those people and build the pipeline of talent that was existing there. 2023 was increasing our capacity to serve. We had not necessarily the problem of, we always have the problem of trying to attract the right customers to work with, but how do we serve them well and increase the capacity that we can based on the success that we have had? And then for 2024, our theme is around a mindset, so an impact mindset. Some of this taken from Liz Wiseman's books, Impact Players, which I really highly recommend. But thinking about the habits and attitudes and this idea of a growth mindset and really trust and credibility within a team. In order to do a job well, there's got to be an understanding of, I can trust the guy next to me to do his job because he's well trained, he knows how to do that, and there's also a discipline and rigor that we have in the way that we approach things. So that's been really part of my focus. Is we've almost shifted from how do you talked about it earlier, how do we have enough revenue coming in the door that we know we can sustain, to, all right, we have that as an initial base. In order to really succeed, we've got to understand, how do we grow people? And that's where I think my vision has gone, is I'm not as much seeing my legacy as how big can we grow this business, or what products we can help customers deliver, but it's the people that can impact. And so the careers that can launch, the leaders that can help develop. And so as long as those people are a part of role model, or even our customers that we're interacting, I want to help them succeed. And so focusing on growing people has really been a huge part of that as I think about culture.
Yeah. Something you said, it was super simple, but yet so profound. As you said, I think sometimes being able to focus on culture, like the way that we ensure that culture is not diluted, is merely calling out the fact that it needs to be a priority, right? Because how relevant is that for so many dev agencies where you have like a million different things going on, you have so many different things vying for your attention? Being able to prioritize and say culture is important. Like, yes, we're software craftsmen. Yes, we're doing the code. We're creating incredible apps. But at the end of the day, like, what keeps us together is a set of core values and a culture that permeates all of our people. So it needs to be a core focus and a priority. So I love that you said that. And I also love that, another kind of unifying theme that I hear you talking about is just the role that education and mentorship plays, and how that can kind of continue to drive and bring people together in your company. So that's really awesome. Would you, I guess, are there any things in particular that you can point to? And I apologize. Can you hear the horn in the back? Just a little. Guys, we do these shows live, so welcome to my world. I'm going to ask my next question so that I can go on mute. Would you mind sharing a little bit about, we were talking about the education piece. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the Craftsmanship Academy? Like, how do you maintain this priority of investing in education, especially when downturns happen in the business?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things when you look at growing people and growing talent, that it's years of investment. So in some ways, it's a little bit of blind faith, like, hey, we're investing in some of this growth because we know we're not going to see the real full return of this for 2 years. So when we're training somebody up, we got to have some of that long-term perspective. And that's kind of how this has been built, over time. We talked about earlier on in some of my journey of being involved with internship and apprenticeship kind of from the beginning. So it's been a passion, but part of where the necessity has come is we've always wanted to have this pipeline of people, across different levels and scales, because not every project needs an absolute expert. Not every task within a project needs the same level of skill and ability. And so for us to deliver better value to our customers, we've got to have a mix of those things so that we can put together a complementary team. But we also know that by having those different levels of abilities, it creates a learning culture where everybody is learning and teaching along the way. And that's a really healthy thing. And so those kind of came as foundational pieces, and we would look to bring on kind of early career developers. But what we would find there is there's usually a couple of paths you end up going down as an early developer. You get a great situation, you're being developed, learning opportunities, and you just stick there. Like, there's no reason to go anywhere else. You're learning and growing, and it's a good spot. Another is, it's kind of an average situation. You've become critical to the business because you're demonstrating value. And now you're kind of stuck because you're valuable to this organization, but you have not been surrounded with experts in your field to really hone your skills and ability. So you don't know as much as you think you know. And so this has kind of led us to kind of seeing that we can build a better foundation and get to people that accelerate their careers faster if we can have them from the very beginning. So there's a level of kind of foundational knowledge that needs to be there, but it's harder to change somebody's habits, especially when, things like test-driven development and the way we think about object-oriented design or feedback loops. If those are the things that we're working on when somebody's very junior, it's a lot easier to train that than try to say, I know you're 4 years into your career, but I want you to change some of these things about the way you approach software development. So for us, it really came down to how do we formalize this? We've had apprenticeship and kind of this idea of, teaching software development similar to another trade. If you want to become an electrician, you have to work alongside an electrician for a year or more to become ready to be able to be certified. But how do we do this? Like, what are the things that need to be important there? And we came to see that, having a cohort, having multiple people that are going through that same stage of learning was actually a way to decrease our effort in teaching. So bringing one person along, you're teaching them everything. Bringing multiple people along, they're learning from each other, and everybody learns at a little bit different paces. So when somebody learns something, they are now that much closer to teaching that person because they just learned it, and they also learned it in the context of where that person is at. I, as an expert in software development, have a hard time explaining the simple concepts that I learned 15 years ago. That's just internalized in intuition now, where if somebody learned that 6 months ago, 6 years ago, or 6 minutes ago, has a totally different perspective on how they might share that. So for us, what we came down to is having this as something that we do on a regular basis also allows us to have kind of a pipeline. And so our goal at this point is we run the Software Craftsmanship Academy every summer. And we've shifted, schedules within that at different times. But our goal is to always be having a pipeline of folks that we're bringing in that we can bring in as a cohort together, and then have long-term relationships with those where we're helping to launch somebody's career that they've got a growth path they can stay with for a long time.
And I just have to say, it's refreshing to hear that, because many times what I hear when we think about the idea of training up the next generation or investing in these junior devs, it's a common pain point, which is we're too small, we can't afford it. Or, our needs are too immediate for the projects that we have. We need somebody who can just run with this. We don't want to be, or we can't afford, we don't have the time in the day to afford to teach them and show them. And that's a very real reality for some very small shops. If you have only 5 employees, you got to get the work done. Otherwise you're going to go bankrupt. Yeah. Would you say, because I know you said that there was a formalization that happened for this academy. At what point, how many employees did you have when you guys finally kind of more formalized it and turned it into an official academy?
Yeah, that was probably about that 15 employee mark.
15. Okay.
Yeah. And it was almost that context of how big is the right size for the cohort each year too. We find it's somewhere, we've had great cohorts of 5, we've had cohorts of 2, kind of everywhere in between, but kind of that 3 to 5 mark has been the goal for us. But at the stage we were at 7, 8 years ago, 2 to 3 would have been, because our goal is to hire these people, so it's got to be the capacity that we can absorb. What is that initial cost? Because while we can get them to a productive level fairly quickly, there's still going to be how long before they're at least covering that cost that they represent. And that's kind of the calculus in our mind, is we're not looking to make a whole lot of profit off of apprentices very early on. We're just trying to get them to a state of they're productive, they're learning, and we're not losing a ton of money on them. And if that can happen in a couple month period of time, then we're at a pretty good spot.
The other thing you had said, which is really an astute observation, is when you have multiple people going through that training, there's a synergistic effect. And this is true. I did a short stint in corporate learning back in my corporate days. And it's so true, is that you have other people, there's the peer-to-peer learning that's happening. And when you have somebody who just learned a concept and is able to talk about that with somebody else, it reinforces the idea in a way that really kind of catapults their growth and their learning. So that's actually a really, really good thing. I'm taking that away. I love that. Hence the reason why it's good to have a cohort go through as opposed to just hiring one-off individuals. That's really, really good. So I feel like it's an obvious answer, but I'd love to hear, if you have any other flavor you'd like to add here, is how have you seen this investment in education, or this educational staple for your business? How have you seen this impacting the overall strategy for your business?
So it's definitely changed the kind of people that we want to hire. And I think for the better, because it boils down to what's important for people. Do you want to be known as the expert about something, or do you want to serve? Do you want to see others learn some of the skills and abilities that you have and you've been blessed with by having great mentors or folks that you've learned with over the years. So I think it's shaped, just who we attract, because mentorship being so central to what we do and growth being central to what we do, it changes what people get excited about. And if people get super passionate about getting an opportunity to help shape the careers of folks just getting started. I mean, almost giddy at times, it's like, oh, you don't know this thing yet. Like, I get the opportunity to help explain that to you. And I think there's a real energy that brings of somebody's always learning versus the slog of, yeah, this is not a fun task, but, oh, you've never done this database thing before. This is an opportunity for you to learn that. And so it brings some of those simple enjoyments even into the process. But it definitely has changed, the overall scope of how we think about the strategy of who we have on the team. So obviously we want to have people growing, we want people at higher levels, but we even have some internal health metrics that I look at the distribution of people we have across different levels and calculate a score on that to kind of say, are we out of whack? Do we have too many junior people? Do we have too many people on the senior side? Is there, I mentioned the 2022 theme was a time when we had a fair number of folks on the senior side and some really junior group of people, but not really anything in the middle. And that's a health metric that we need to be able to pay attention to and recognize that's something to address.
That's great. And yeah, I mean, in a business like software development agencies, it's a professional service. So everything that you're doing at the end of the day, it's based on the individuals in your team. So like your team is literally everything. I just want to commend you. I think you guys are doing an excellent job because you're prioritizing and investing in your people in a way that is very much a sustainable process. And, I think it's worth also highlighting something you said earlier, which is to some extent, it is a little bit of an act of faith. I think I'm just paraphrasing here, but it's a little bit of an act of faith because, do you have like a clear, like, these are the dollars we put into this person, and then therefore this is all the money that we got out. Like, there's maybe not a clear, concrete calculation, but you just know because your mission and your vision is so clearly defined, you know that you're on the right path because you're taking these steps and these actions. So well done on that. I know plenty of dev agencies who, like I said, have just been like, nope, I'd rather just hire senior devs and let somebody else do the training. And it's like, you're in the trenches and you're doing the hard work. So well done on that. So I guess, Caleb, as we start to round out this episode, I'd love to just give you an opportunity to speak some words of wisdom. I know you have a lot. So I'd love for you to share maybe a couple of words of wisdom. Speak specifically to that software developer or senior software developer who is in corporate America right now, or maybe is somebody who is new to the software development agency business. Maybe they just started their agency this past year. What would be some words of wisdom you would give to those people?
Yeah, I think it kind of highlights on some of the things we've talked about, within the scope of this conversation. It was a realization for me, and I don't even know why these words came out of my mouth the first time that I shared it, but like, I enjoy solving business problems, and like, that's interesting to me. So what is that thing that you're good at and is kind of your niche, that can kind of be your calling card, the thing that you're coming back to? But I think another aspect of that has served me well over my career is figuring out, how do I help those that I'm working for succeed? What is important to them now? What's the win in this case? Because if I can be passionate about serving the organization and the goals and really understanding what they are, then I'm going to be much more successful in my own pursuits. I see this in my experiences as a consultant working in larger organizations with software developers. There's often this perspective of, I know what my piece of the bigger system is that we're working on, but I don't actually know why we're doing this. Like, is this a good strategy? Do I know the why behind we're going after this particular piece? And the more of that context that exists, the more of the why. We all know that you can make much better decisions when you've got that frontline experience. So how do you raise that up and focus on, this is the thing that's most important right now.
Those are great words of wisdom. So if I were to flip them even, I'd say like what you're saying, be very mindful about what is it that would bring about a win for the person you're serving. And then maybe even use that as a basis for focusing on your unique value proposition and your unique niche, because we all have something. We're all bringing it to the table. So really clarify what that thing is. You're not just a software developer. You are fill in the blank. In your case, you said you're you like to solve business problems, right? So there's something that's there.
And that's a healthy filter to have. Like there's so many things you can pursue. Sometimes when you mention to somebody you're a software developer, well, what kind of software? It's like being a doctor. Like what's your specialty? Find that specialty, because it allows you to figure out what you want to say no to as much as what you want to say yes to.
Yes, that's awesome. Well, Caleb, I'm going to guess people are going to listen to this and they're going to be like, I've got questions for him. I would love to connect with him. Where would be the best places that somebody could connect if they have further questions, or they just want to follow what you're up to with Role Model Software?
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely where I post the most of things that we're doing, some of our new marketing material. I think that's how we connected initially. Also, happy to chat over email. So reach out to me, caleb.woods@rolemodelsoftware.com, and happy to continue conversations there as well.
I love it. Caleb, thank you so much for hopping on the show. I will just put a plug in here. I've loved the videos you guys have been posting on LinkedIn. So yeah, it's exactly how we got connected, because it's something, I think it's one thing when you post text, but when you're starting to post video, I feel like you just engage in a different way with your audience. So go check them out, follow the stuff that they've got going on. They're definitely people to model yourselves after. It's almost like it's in the name.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks so much, Caleb.
Awesome. Thanks.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value out of our podcast today, please share it with your friends and subscribe for future episodes. Also, don't forget to leave us a review, because it helps other people find us and hear inspiring stories like the one we heard today. If you are the founder of a software development agency, or you know somebody who is, and you'd like to share something exciting that you're up to with our audience, drop me a line at tony@equip.com. That's ACCQUIP.com.